We're back on What the Funk. I was out last week. I wasn't able to do a podcast, so I'm actually going to double up today. But first, we have Craig Heilman of Arbo. Get into him in just a second and all of his background. But I just wanted to say last weekend, I went to Oregon. Have you ever been to Oregon before?
I have not been. Well, no, I've been to Oregon briefly for a wedding.
I was there for a wedding last weekend. I mean, you talk about a place that, whatever you picture Oregon to be, it's exactly what it is, right? All the coffee shops, very granola, very farm to table. The wedding was great. The weather was awesome. Had a really nice time, and that sort of led into the July 4th weekend, which was a blast. So nice little break. We all need those every once in a while, and here we are back working, podcasting, diving into the middle of the summer heat. So, Craig, we met a few weeks ago just after Nigel Gorbold came on my podcast. I think you guys had a listen. We talked a little bit of business and invited you to come on. So excited to have you on today. I don't know a ton about your background or about Arbo, but I know that you're passionate about the company that you work for. You're based out of Washington, D.C., which is a little bit unusual for people we have on the pod. So we'll get into all that stuff. But since our listeners don't know who you are you, Craig Heilman?
Who am I? Well, thanks for having me, Jeremy. I'm delighted to be on the podcast and recognizing that I might not be the usual in terms of being a Washingtonian. So I look forward to kind of exploring that a little bit. You might have some questions around that. I guess in terms of who I am, I'd identify myself as an entrepreneur. I mean, I guess first and foremost, professionally an entrepreneur. I'm kind of a general manager, as a lot of entrepreneurs tend to be, kind of master of jack of all trades, master of none, if you will. Although most of my business experience kind of came, I was on the sales and marketing side. Personally, I'm a husband and father. I think like you, I'm a proud veteran of the United States Navy, so that's a part of my identity.
Awesome.
I see some sports pictures behind you, so I guess I'm a fan of the Baltimore Ravens, the Washington Nationals, and the Virginia Cavaliers. So there's an interesting mix there. I grew up in Baltimore, and but now I guess I've been in DC since 2004. I met my wife here, settled down here. So I guess I'm, like it or not, I'm a Washingtonian now, but I kept the Ravens. I enjoy the Nationals. The Orioles are good again, so I'm back being an Orioles fan as well.
Really good.
Yeah, really good. Kind of fun. We're on the other side of that with the Nationals. Going to be another couple of years, but we're hanging in there. Other than that, I enjoy doing outdoor sports like skiing, like live music. I'm a very amateur drummer, I guess, is kind of another passion of mine. So I don't know. I guess where do you want to start with all that?
Well, first of all, I think I have to end the podcast. You did say you're a Baltimore Ravens fan. Me being a diehard Patriots fan, I'm not sure if we can do this, but I'll allow it. Ravens fans are pretty passionate, and we actually had some guests this past weekend from Baltimore and sort of had all that fun. There's like a healthy level of respect and dislike at the same time between Ravens fans and Patriots fans, almost like we're division rivals, but they got a great franchise, man.
Well, in my family, it's kind of a challenge because most of my family's from Pittsburgh.
Oh,
so I
wow.
rooted for the Steelers for when Baltimore lost their team. I was kind of young, but I remember it. When they lost their team, I kind of rooted for Pittsburgh after that, and then that became kind of a real problem once we got what we're then the Cleveland Browns, I think. So I'm used to having that, little bit of a family rivalry.
I mean, that's what it's like in the Northeast too. Everything's so congested, right? That you could, like, my wife is from York, Pennsylvania, not too far from Baltimore. When we go back to that area, we typically fly into Baltimore. Her dad lives in Pikesville, which I'm sure you're familiar with, just outside of Baltimore. But it's like you talk to somebody in York, and there's an equal likelihood of them being a Washington Commanders fan.
Something like that.
Formerly the Redskins. It's hard for me to break that. So you've got the Washington fans, you've got Pittsburgh fans, you have Eagles fans, and you have Ravens fans. It could be any of those, right? If you're from a place like York or Harrisburg or really sort of the center of the state and in Pennsylvania, it sort of depends on family allegiances, but same thing in certain areas of New England, right? Depending on where you are in Connecticut, it's Red Sox fans, it's Giants fans, it's Patriots fans, it's Celtics, it's Knicks, right? Which is some of the beauty of the Northeast, right? Out here, like everybody's a Broncos fan, everybody's a Nuggets fan, everybody's an Avalanche fan. There's no professional sports teams within like 10 hours in any direction that you go in. But out there, you go 10 hours, you're talking about completely different allegiances. So it's one of the things I miss about the Northeast, and some of that kind of fun camaraderie and banter. But let's stick on Baltimore for a second. So I actually really like Baltimore. When I was in college, I had a girlfriend who lived in North Baltimore, like just off of I-83 as you go north of the city, and developed a little bit of an affinity for the town. Talk about what that was like growing up in Baltimore. And then did you go to Annapolis? Is that what happened with your naval career?
No, not quite. But getting in the Navy was sort of an interesting career twist for me. And hopefully you have a lot of listeners that are kind of getting into their careers in oil and gas, et cetera. And so some of these twists might be of interest. But so I started out in finance. I went to school for business, and I went back to Baltimore after school and worked for a company called White Mason that was a brokerage firm, and that's in Baltimore.
Yep.
And that was great. It was interesting. I liked it, but I just kind of hadn't thought. I didn't do a lot of traveling when I was young. Kind of, most of my life was kind of Baltimore centric, and I sort of, kind of had that see the world, join the Navy. That was the commercial at the time. But even more importantly, that was kind of the last sort of tail end of the first Top Gun generation in the Navy. So, if you watch Top Gun too many times, it can lead you down to the recruiter's office. And I kind of, seeking, again, a little bit of leadership, a little bit of adventure. I left finance and went in, a totally different direction, which kind of surprised my mom and dad at the time, and went to the Navy, went to flight school, and had a really great career in the Navy. But also, as that was happening, I'll still love business, still thought I'd get back into business someday. And so when I finished in the Navy, went back to business school and kind of restarted my business career. But it was interesting to watch Top Gun again and think about all the kids out there that are going to kind of go down the same road, which is good for the Navy, because we certainly need to have people interested in serving the military. It's a great career choice. You learn things that you never thought you'd learn. You see things you never thought you'd see. It's a chance to really just to develop, as a whole person. And of course, it's a chance to get back to your country and serve. So all those things.
Yeah. So you mentioned, so you were in the Navy, but you also went to flight school. So were you literally one of those guys that was like taking off in planes and landing planes on these big naval ships in the middle of the ocean?
So yes, I was a naval flight officer, and I flew an airplane called the S-3 Viking that we had that was carrier based, and it was used to hunt subs, and it was used to do surface surveillance, reconnaissance. It was used to do air-to-air refueling. We were kind of an organic refueling asset for the battle group, the carrier battle group. And so now when I was in Iraqi Freedom, it's kind of the first wave of Iraqi Freedom in 2003. Mm-hmm. And, what we would do is we would take off with a strike package. We would take them into, in country, essentially. We would make sure they were topped off with fuel, because after the first couple of days of the war, all the sort of pre-planned targets were already gone. And really what the strike aircraft were doing are trying to support troops in contact on the ground. And so the most critical part of that was gas, because the longer they could stay on station, the more chance they would have to be of use to the troops on the ground. And so gas was sort of the critical enabler. So we would drag them in, gas them up. We would book back to the ship, land, and then meet them on the other side. And that was kind of what we did day in, day out, for the whole deployment. But Yes, S3 was a cool airplane, and it was a lot of fun. And we had a crew, normally a crew of 2, sometimes a crew of 4, depending on what we were doing.
I mean, that sounds awesome, right? Like that feels like a scene out of a movie or something where you get to play soldier, but you were doing it in real life, which is super cool. And obviously we appreciate your service to the country. So you took a different path, right? You were at Legg Mason, which, big finance company based out of Baltimore. You decided to go into the Navy, spend a bunch of time there. Then you get back. What did you do when you got back from being a naval officer?
Well, I was lucky because I kind of experienced civilian life, prior to going in the Navy, so I kind of knew what that was about, and had some ideas, again around getting back into business. And so go back to business school full time was kind of the natural thing for me. I still got my last duty station. I was serving in a place called Office of Naval Intelligence. I'd moved to D.C. Met my wife to be. And so I went back to business school full time at Virginia, which is why I'm a Virginia Cavaliers fan. And started to think about what type of business I could start. Start to kind of think about entrepreneurship I started a business while I was in business school. It was my first startup and had a lot of start. It didn't have a lot of up, which can sometimes be the case, in entrepreneurship. And I learned a lot from that. And I ended up leaving, when I graduated, I went to DuPont, into their kind of executive development program. And I got to do something super cool there because I ended up managing their military Kevlar and Nomex business. And Nomex is the material that flight suits are made out of. It's the fire-resistant material that we make flight suits out of. NASCAR drivers, their race suits, et cetera. All kinds of industrial applications for flame resistance. Kevlar, of course, is used in body armor. Yep. And those are 2 iconic brands at DuPont and really incredible advanced materials. And so I spent a lot of years at DuPont, and that kind of was my exposure to the oil and gas industry. DuPont is around for 250 years. It's one of our older companies in America. They for a long time owned Conoco. When they wanted to sort of vertically integrate their entire supply chain. They were early into bio-based materials and all kinds of different things. So, but I was real familiar with kind of the oil and gas supply chains because, of course, like a lot of advanced materials, what starts it all is oftentimes a petroleum-based product.
Oh yeah.
And so kind of understood that industry from being at DuPont, and ultimately got back into the industry after a couple more twists and turns.
Yeah, this is honestly like what I love about podcasting is getting into people's stories because everyone's story is different. Like I can see how it got there. You understood the value, obviously, of petroleum and literally gassing up jets in Iraq, right? You saw it firsthand and produced petroleum products and refined products working for DuPont, right? Despite not being in the traditional oil and gas hubs, you still found your way into the industry. So after DuPont, like what year are we talking about and then what?
Well, we're now kind of coming up around 2010, the kind of the turn of that decade. I had some children come into my life, blessed with some children. And I was still, thinking about entrepreneurship and I had that big company experience. DuPont wasn't really reinvesting in the military side of the business, which is where I was really, really focused. They were moving into other industries. There's since been a lot of, restructuring of that great company. And I actually went into government because I also, kind of had the urge to serve again. I did miss serving. And being in DC, that's kind of we're a company town in some way, like Houston is, but the business here is government. And so I got a really, really cool gig at the U.S. Small Business Administration because at the time they were super focused on helping veterans transition back. Like I mentioned, I'd been in civilian life. I had a sense of what that was like. It wasn't that scary to me, but for a lot of that, it's really scary. They've never done anything but wear the uniform, and a lot of the jobs that they have, don't really translate very well. It's not, many sniper jobs, in civilian life. Not to be kind of use a morbid example, but so I got the gig running entrepreneurship development programs to help military veterans become entrepreneurs, because they
Wow.
kind of had sort of that disposition, right? That, not risk adverse, like to kind of, be general managers, understand how to lead people, understand operations, processes, et cetera. So vets make great entrepreneurs, and in fact, become entrepreneurs at a much higher rate than non-vets. So the government, to its credit, said we ought to be supporting that. We ought to be actively trying to help vets start businesses. And I got a chance to lead some of those programs as they were emerging at the SBA, which was really fun. And to close the loop, so what happened with that is I was spending a lot of time traveling the country looking at all these great businesses that vets are starting. And again, I still have that itch. I want to get that. I want to be an entrepreneur. And I had served at the Office of Naval Intelligence with Chip Mollenhauer, who's the CEO and founder of Arbo.
Okay. There we go.
Because of exactly how did this get to Arbo? Well, in a roundabout way, but I had served with Chip at the Office of Naval Intelligence. And when I went off to business school, he went off to law school. And he took his turn in big law and was doing energy regulatory stuff and kind of grinding it out one of the big firms. Also, he comes from a family of entrepreneurs. He's thinking that, I'm going to do my own thing. And again, a little bit of it is a veteran mindset. You spend a lot of time kind of, in the chain of command and kind of doing what the machine needed you to do. And so a lot of vets kind of like to, be their own boss after that. And I think Chip had a little bit of that. Anyway, so as I'm traveling around looking for a great business, or looking for a great idea, sometimes the limitation to entrepreneurship is just sort of like, you can't come up with the idea yourself all the time, but that shouldn't stop people, because maybe you can find somebody else that's got a good idea and you're willing to kind of take the risk and be part of the journey. So you need people to start stuff, but you also need people to join. You need people to join those ventures too, that are willing to kind of, be part of those early days that can be the ones that are, the most scary, but also the most fun. And so it turned out that the company that was, I thought, the most interesting one being started was the one that was happening in my own backyard, because Chip was starting it.
Yep.
And because he was doing all this energy regulatory work, working on these big infrastructure projects. At the time, a lot of them were nuclear, when there was still some nuclear, things happening. You saw that there was an awful lot of data, an awful lot of risk involved in how the regulatory domain intersected the business domain and the impact on these assets and all these businesses. But that a lot of that data wasn't really being harnessed and utilized in the way that you would think it could be. A lot of the decisions were being made based on, the highest paid person's opinion or whatever the law firm was saying. And he just thought with, now we're talking 2013, 2014, where kind of the big data technologies are really starting to mature, and there was a lot of data out there just waiting to be better accessed and better put to work to make business decisions. And so he happened to live on Capitol Hill, and I had moved to Capitol Hill, and that was unbeknownst to the both of us, because we went our separate ways after serving in O&I, and then we kind of found each other again because we moved to the same neighborhood. And so we had a lot of late night discussions about starting companies, and I told him, I said, Chip, like, don't ask me, because I'm the last person you should ever ask if you should leave your secure, stable job and start a company, because I always say yes, absolutely, you should do that. And he ended up doing that. I was able to be, an early advisor and investor in the company when he was doing the early friends and family kind of round, that are friends, families, and fools, they call it in entrepreneurship, the 3 Fs. And I said, hey, listen, if this thing gets going, I'll quit my job and at the Small Business Administration and join you. And fortunately, that this startup had some up and was able to start hiring people, and I got to be one of them. And and I knew again, Chip had a lot of the characteristics you look for in any business leader, but particularly an entrepreneur. I mean, I think number one, you got to have kind of the idea, you got to have the intelligence and the fortitude to go after that idea. You got to be tenacious, so he's a tenacious guy. He's persistent. and you got to have integrity, because it's just, if you don't inculcate kind of values into the very first, team that you put together, and if you're not able to communicate to your customers that are taking a chance on a startup, which isn't, the oil and gas industry is pretty traditional, right? It's the whole maxim that you never lose your job, hire an IBM kind of a thing, right? They're not, you get a lot of, and you know this from all your time, carrying a bag in the oil and gas industry and making the sale. If they haven't heard of you, it's generally tough to,
Yeah.
if somebody's not recommending you, it's a little bit tough to close the deal, or actually not close the deal, but just to get in the door,
Oh yeah.
So
Completely. It is. And there's a couple of quotients that I like to use. One of them that my friend Justin Bucci gave me, which is, if you have the will, I'll teach you the skill. And I think will and skill are two very important traits for any entrepreneur, and certainly for a business leader. And additionally, we talked about this a few weeks ago on one of the more recent podcasts with the Spira Data guys that came on. They have something literally on their wall that's called the say-do ratio. If you're skewed too much toward the say and there's not enough toward the do, that's a problem. And you lose credibility really fast. So just do what you say you're going to do. And I think those are very important entrepreneurial skills as well.
Yeah, I love the say-do ratio. We have a good friend of Arbo who happened to be a West Point guy, not a Navy guy, but we don't hold that against him at all. And he's a big customer of ours too. So, but he loves the say-do ratio. He introduced me to that term. I think that's a great one.
It's the best.
For sure. And then I like to say, plan the work and work the plan. It's just another thing we like to say. A lot of times you plan the work, but you spend a lot of time planning the work and not working the plan. Kind of got to do it in reverse sometimes.
Yeah, no, I agreed. And beyond that, while we're throwing these phrases out there, I think it's a Mike Tyson phrase, right? Everybody has a plan until they get hit in the mouth. And then what? Right? How do you then bounce back? How do you then persevere? Because it's going to happen in business. The best laid plans always go to hell, right? How do you persevere when you take that first kind of real tough shot in the nose?
Are you asking or telling?
I'm telling.
I think in our experience, I guess that when we got punched in the face, just to bring it, to an actual experience we had, we were fortunate. A lot of our value proposition is around helping with project development, right? And initially for us with pipelines, and because we were able to bring in all this regulatory data and turn it into business intelligence, and in this particular case, business intelligence for what's my cost of schedule going to look like on this project, because I know that the regulatory environment's changing, and getting through these regulatory milestones, whether it's the environmental review, or the certificate process for interstate pipeline, that landscape would change. It's not an automatic anymore. This is going back to the shale boom in 2013, 2014, and we started to see just a lot more litigation, a lot more opposition.
Yeah.
And so, this regulatory data that was kind of maybe over in the regulatory department or in the legal department, but not have been, hands-on with the project team, or the senior leadership that was, making the final investment decision for these projects. That was really became key. And that's really why we were able to succeed in the initial phases of our business. Well, then that kind of all tailed off a bit, right? We got through that build cycle, and then we had the whole pandemic thing, right? And so we had a couple of pretty big headwinds. And, in that, our initial core value prop wasn't as relevant because there weren't many projects. And oil was minus $20 a barrel for a couple of days. That was fun. There.
Really fun.
And we were sort of looking at each other saying, well, now what? And we were fortunate enough to have enough capital that we could reinvest in product development while we weren't really going to do a lot on the sales and marketing side because people were just stuck, right?
Yeah.
And that's when we kind of went from gas into the oil side, and we were able to kind of build and launch what we call our liquid commerce platform, which we can get into. But So the point of that is like, when you get punched in the face, like you got to figure out where you can make some progress, once you kind of feel hopefully you got punched in the face and you get knocked to the ground and you could kind of just, get back up quickly. But, so now, now it's kind of a punch in the face. And now it's all kind of come full circle. We've got, I don't know how many hundreds of billions of dollars, right, coming into the marketplace to do what? To build infrastructure again and to have projects. And so to us, that really feels like it's come full circle. We've been in business for, going on 9 years now. A lot of it is just getting up and staying in the fight. Just keep staying in the fight, right? Every day that you're still in business and still winning business and still thinking about what you're going to do tomorrow, it gives you another chance to get where you're ultimately trying to go. And so we feel really good about just our staying power in the marketplace, and especially more so even our ability to keep our original customers. We still have our original customer. And once we get a customer, they tend to stay with us. So that's just one example.
So who are Arbo's customers? And if you were to summarize it in a nutshell, what do you guys do over at Arbo?
Well, so let me start with what we do. So essentially we sell 4 things. We sell data, software, research, and consulting. And we kind of do that in different combinations depending on the customer and the need. And all of that is about, kind of taking regulatory data and turning it into business intelligence, something you kind of act on, you can build into your decision loops, that you can automate and kind of improve your workflow with, all those kinds of things. And we do that. Ultimately our vision is like, and this gets a little bit back to the military ethos around, being patriots and kind of being proud of America and wanting America to succeed, particularly in terms of energy independence. But we want to help sustain America's ability to build infrastructure, right? We've talked a ton about that. We get into the DC thing, but it has been amazing to see people in DC having conversations about permitting reform. Like you can't get something further from the front page than permitting reform if you roll the clock back a couple of years. And so that was a pretty interesting experience for Chip and I and the rest of the team that are here in DC. But that's core to our vision. Like we got to be able to build this stuff, right? And we got to be able to do it on a timeline, and we got to be able to do it to a budget if we want anybody to finance it. And so we're in that loop. And so it could be a midstream company that's building a project. So midstream is a core. Midstream pipeline operators primarily, whether they're a gas or oil. Whether they're talking about emerging pipelines because they want to do something with hydrogen, right? Or they want to do CO2 through a pipe. So that's a very core segment to us, and we'll help them on the front end of that as it relates to developing something. That tends to be with data and sometimes more on the consulting side. And then on the, once it's in, kind of in the ground and operational, more on the optimization side. And that's where kind of the software comes in, where they're able to continuously look at contract roll-offs on their pipes or their competitive pipes, or they're able to, look at utilization, things like that. So that's one side of it. On the other side of it, the other big segment is kind of on the trading side. So if you're trying to move physical commodities as a trader, one of the big trading shops, and you really care about the impact of infrastructure on the overall supply demand picture in terms of what types of positions you might be taking, or, there's a regulatory driven event that's disrupting the market, like Freeport goes down, and you're trying to figure out like, well, when's it coming back online? And you just like, who actually determines that? Like, who has to decide? We can get involved in all that because we sort of have that expertise. We kind of know where to wrangle the data. Mountain Valley Pipeline, everything about how that has worked its way through finally to ultimately be passed into a law that the Mountain Valley Pipeline must go in service. That's been something we've been working with our customers with since the very beginning, in terms of trying to anticipate what might happen in the courts, anticipate what might happen as it relates to cost and schedule,
Mm-hmm.
for all the normal things that go on with the construction of a project like that. That's kind of generally who we work with. We're forward looking, really looking at transmission, because that's going to be a whole entire. I mean, that's where the most critical need is going forward. It's very similar to building a pipeline, except it's probably even worse as it relates to all the stakeholders that have to, get aligned, and because it's so much more of a state and local
Sure.
type thing than a federal, and that's where a lot of the tension is, and where a lot of the probably the regulatory kind of reform or restructuring has to occur to make that successful.
No, this is cool. So you provide the data, you provide the analytics, you provide the effectively the consulting to put companies in the position to be able to garner funding for fairly large projects, right? Which is cool. I mean, it sounds like you really get a firsthand view into some of the larger intrastate infrastructure projects that are happening from a pipeline and gathering perspective. I mean, it sounds cool.
Yeah, we think it is. Again, I don't know, maybe others didn't, but now everybody thinks it's a little bit cool, just because they have some sort of sense of, gee, okay, we need energy infrastructure, and what does it take to build energy infrastructure, and what does that involve from a market business dynamics perspective, and what does that involve from a government perspective, and how does that all have to work together? And so it's a pretty good lens on what American industry has to do generally to continue to evolve and to compete. And obviously energy enables everything else. So if we can compete there, then we can compete downstream of all that by making all the products, all the iPhones that rely on these critical materials, a lot of which are, oil and gas based at the end of the day.
For sure. So you're based in DC, and I love DC. I actually remember going there when I was, I think, 16, for something called Presidential Classroom Scholars, where you spend a week in DC with a bunch of other kind of high achiever types throughout the US. And it was awesome. Like, I got to meet with state representatives from New Hampshire, got to walk around all the businesses, all of the big buildings in the Capitol, tour the White House, got to go on sort of the Senate floor, like really, really fun stuff that made me appreciate everything that goes down in the unique city of DC, where there's really nothing else like it in the US or in the world. But there you are in DC, and you're doing a lot of business that's outside of DC, right? So do you find yourself on airplanes going to places like Houston, going out to Pittsburgh, going to Dallas, going to Denver? Like, where is most of your business based?
Yes, Houston is number one for us, and
sure.
And, thankfully Southwest can get us there pretty quickly, and most of the time pretty reliably. And so I'm going out on vacation next week, and then the following week is Houston, and then the week after that is Tulsa and Oklahoma City. Yep. Surprise there. We've got a pretty good group of customers in New York that are more on that finance, right? They're trading, they're hedge funds that are oil and gas focused. That's kind of the trifecta, and a little bit of Denver, but that's our world for sure. Hopefully, we like it. DC, again, it might not be ideal for running into a prospective customer, at a social function or something, or on the golf course or something. But it is nice to be able to bring some of that perspective both directions, right? Particularly as, folks have got a little bit more divergent in their viewpoints, and they might not interact as much with others to sort of, kind of understand the different viewpoints, particularly as something as controversial as sometimes oil and gas can be. It's nice to be able to, to kind of see all sides of that, and in our own small way as we interact, be able to share perspectives, right?
Yeah.
And when DC's at its best, that's happening all the time, right? People are open-minded, and they're having conversations, whether they be professional or they be casual, and talking about these issues. And so we definitely like being here. And we like being in Houston too. So So we try to split time.
Well, you definitely like humid places if you like DC and you like Houston, man. I've sweat through numerous suits in both of those cities, so I
Well,
appreciate the air conditioning.
at least you don't have to wear a suit anymore, right? That's one of the things that's changed in our world a bit.
Like 90% of the time. There's still a couple companies that, you got to make sure that you dress up nicely when you come in. Not ties anymore, but still maybe a suit jacket or a button down. But for the most part, especially in this whole digital wildcatters movement, you can just dress like we're dressed right now and be fine. Want to shift a little bit towards sort of the future. As you mentioned hydrogen, right? You mentioned some of the new projects that are going on. Where do you see the future for energy in the United States? And you're sort of on the forefront for this, helping companies get approved for projects that will, I guess, transmit and move product. Do you think it's in something like hydrogen? Do you see more of a movement on the geothermal, on renewables? Like, give me sort of a sense of what the industry energy as a whole could look like in the next 5-10 years.
Well, I just start at the kind of the macro piece of that because I see two sort of big macro trends that if you did have both of them, I would be worried, but we now sort of have both. So I'm pretty optimistic. And I mean, because ultimately we've got to sort of redevelop entire markets and industries, right? As we make this sort of energy transition or energy evolution. I was really fortunate to work at DuPont and have that be where a lot of my, training and insight, sort of, because they have that 200-year history of doing not business development, but whole market development, where you did the basic R&D, then you did the application development, and, the materials development, and then you had to go out, now you've got something that you can supply, then you had to develop the whole entire demand side of that equation, right? And that had to happen over 20 or 30 years, right? And that's sort of the cycle we're on now. And it takes big players, right? So you got to have the super majors engaged, and you got to have government engaged. And we didn't sort of have all of that happening. And I feel like a lot of that's coming together. So one, I guess, pillar of this is that I think there's going to be more consolidation, and sort of some of these big guys are going to keep getting a little bit bigger. But because of the sort of the money in terms of the government sponsorship and the money is there, the ability to make sort of these big bets on market development for technologies that they weren't necessarily as focused on maybe 10 years ago, and hydrogen and CO2, CCUS come to mind. I see that as a really good trend, and there's probably going to be some more consolidation on that side. Now, I'd be a little bit worried about that from a market perspective, right? Because, you start to see, some of that innovation slow down once you get a little bit over consolidated. So the other thing that I've been really happy to see is all the startup activity and the money going into the innovation side of it for not the big players. Let's assume the government money is mostly going to go to a lot of the big players.
Sure.
Right? They're the ones that can more easily come to the table for that type of and DOE doesn't want to make $10 billion loans to folks that, are super high risk, right? That's
sure.
They got to steward that taxpayer money to some extent, right? Not always, doesn't always work out, but pretty good hit rate over a long period of time. So seeing that money coming in on the private side, be the traditional kind of venture route, coming back to clean tech, is really important, and I think encouraging, because there was a huge clean tech wave in kind of that 06, 05 time, and that really played out, and all the venture money went somewhere else. Yep. You got those two things together. So I see a world where you have that slow and steady market development on some of these technologies that we already know about, and we do get to the finish line on it's going to be 20 years, but we get there, and that there is a hydrogen economy, and there is real carbon capture and sequestration and some of these things that we're talking about. But I also see that there's going to be breakthrough. There's going to be some breakthrough innovation that we have no idea what it's going to do, but it's going to totally change the game because there's so much activity there. So I don't know what exactly that looks like, but it makes me a lot more optimistic than I was 10 years ago. Thinking about the space over the long term.
Yeah, I'm with you. It sounds like energy addition, right? If I were to sum it up, and also forms of energy that even a few years ago we didn't consider as viable, which will become very viable. So I'm intrigued to see how it plays out, and then of course you'll be on the tip of the spear from the regulatory standpoint, understanding what the government's doing, and then helping companies comply with that, and then ultimately put them in position to get the level of financing that they need to take on some of these massive projects, like you guys are doing. So pretty cool stuff.
Yeah, I think
Um,
that's the third component I didn't mention, but there does need to be restructure. There needs to be structural change that'll come along with all that, whether it's led by the existing, major players, whether it's because it has to be adaptive to an innovation that we're not thinking about, breakthrough technology, or it's just sort of the slow, methodical work. But yeah, the power markets and the way that they work, and there's got to be change there as well. And I think that's going to happen. I think, we've made great progress in just the last 2 years towards at least everybody recognizing the problem and sort of working towards it in pretty bipartisan way from where I sit,
yeah,
surprisingly bipartisan way.
yeah. I mean, and to bring it back to Arbo a little bit, like we talked about this when we first met and chatted for about 45 minutes a few weeks back. You really need, at least as far as your business development type people, to be consultative, because you're not really selling a product, right? Sure, you have some products that you can sell, but you're selling somebody that can see a vision, right? That can bring a lot of different pieces together, and it's fairly unique, right? So I see how somebody in your role and the team that works for you um, has to listen really well, has to be creative, and has to be able to shift gears relatively quickly, which I'm sure makes for kind of a fun business environment for you and your team. It's a little bit unique. You're not pushing one thing. You have to really understand the client needs, the regulatory environment, um, what financing companies are looking for, understand capital markets. It's cool. I'm just putting it all together, but this is not the type of job where you go in and you're pitching one thing every day. I'm guessing in the course of 2 hours, if you're on 3 or 4 different calls, they're all very different.
Yeah, that's a good problem and a tough problem at the same time, as you mentioned, because it is a knowledge, it's kind of a knowledge based sale, and even though our customers might look alike, you take two pipelines that look very similar. One of them might be all about kind of the efficiency part of it, and one of them might be all about kind of the growth part of it, and they kind of
Yep.
look at things different ways. One of them might really want to do a lot of automation and digital kind of transformation inside of their enterprise. One of them might want to do none of that and just kind of get as much cash,
Sure.
siphon as much cash off as they can to return to their shareholders or their unit holders. So, yeah, I think we'd like it to be, cookie cutter, same widget for everybody, and let's just sell a million of them. But that's not necessarily the problem we're solving.
Nice. So before we run here, I like to put my guests on the spot. Hey, puppy, how you doing? I like to put people on the spot and do a little bit of rapid fire. So I'm going to say a word or a phrase, and you have to say the first thing that comes to mind.
All right.
The best place to get a crab cake in Baltimore.
Angelina's on Harford Road in Parkville.
Nice,
I think
nice.
it's still there.
Well, it was at least. Ray Lewis.
Best linebacker that ever played the game.
Nice. I'll accept that. And now, finally, cocaine in the White House.
I saw that headline. I thought we were on to different like drugs these days. We've seems like we've legalized everything in DC based on just the aroma that you get walking down the street. So I guess like surprised it wasn't something else.
Yeah, yeah.
Cocaine must have been somebody 1980s throwback or something.
Right. Well, anyways, that's fun stuff. Appreciate the me letting you put you letting me put you on the spot. So finally, Craig, where can people find you? Find Arbo? Where are you guys at?
Well, we're right on the Capitol in DC physically, so I'm sitting in the Capitol's right over there.
Nice.
I'm a old taco shop, which is no longer in business. We've got the office space, and there's a whole story about taco shops in our headquarters office space. But www.goarbo.com. So goarbo.com is where we're at, and our emails are all just our first name at goarbo.com. So Craig at goarbo.com is me. Happy to take an email or call us on the phone, because that's really like retro and fun for us to talk.
Old school.
Right. So so that's where you can find us, and I appreciate you taking the time to get to know us a little bit today, Jeremy. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, this is fun stuff. I mean, your background is fascinating, and I need to talk to more people that are in DC that play a little bit of a different role. I got enough people from Houston and Midland and Denver and Calgary on this podcast. So fun to discover you. I think your business is doing cool things, and appreciate having you on today, Craig. You have a good weekend, my man.
Thank you, sir.